I don't know about you, but I'm really excited to be here. Welcome to our 2019 ICE Exchange. I'm so excited to be kicking off this week's activities. We have a full schedule ahead of us, and I'm happy to see so many people here. This is so great to have a full room. 2019 is a record-breaking year for ICE. We say that every year, but we are welcoming 775 attendees at this year's exchange. Phenomenal. This includes 275 new attendees. Where do you all come from? That's amazing. Yeah, each of you, please tell me where you come from. No. What I would like to do is acknowledge our first-time attendees. If you would please stand up so that we can see who you are. Rhonda, yes. Thank you all for joining us, and we hope that you enjoy the conference and that you find value in all of the sessions. Thank you all for being here. I want to personally welcome all of you to the ICE community. I've been attending the ICE Exchange for 13 years, and I get most excited about meeting those new to ICE who are experiencing our wonderful conference for the very first time. Seeing your faces and hearing what you're learning about is so exciting to me because I remember my first time at ICE and feeling the same way. I would also like to recognize those who have completed the ICE Credentialing Specialist Certificate program. Please stand if you completed it this year or in the past. Everybody! Congratulations. We have been so excited about that program. After 8 enrollment periods, the program has attracted more than 800 credentialing professionals. That's phenomenal. Please stand. Oh, well, I've already acknowledged you, so sorry about that. I'll acknowledge you again. Thank you so much. You're building your knowledge and providing that knowledge to better your organizations, and that's a true professional. And we know it's not easy to do that. You're learning a lot of information, so good job. I'm so happy that you could all join us. This is my favorite event of the year because of the great education scheduled and the people that I get to learn from. This year is no exception. For starters, we are in fabulous San Diego. We could not have asked for a better location or weather. In addition, I'm really excited for some of the newer features that are being offered at this year's exchange. As part of our connection activities, we are offering Meet the Author's Handbook in celebration of the release of our 3rd edition of the ICE Certification Handbook. 50 authors contributed to the new handbook, so be sure to join one of those sessions to learn more about their work. I just want to warn anybody who is getting their handbook here and taking it home, you might have to pay extra for baggage. It's a big book, lots of fantastic information. I'm also looking forward to the ICE Film Fest, which was a new feature at the 2018 Exchange and was met with resoundingly positive feedback. I'm so happy that it's back in the schedule. The Film Fest allows for a break in our traditional learning to have informal discussions inspired by short but inspiring films. Finally, we are recognizing our dedicated and hardworking volunteers on Thursday morning with the Volunteer Appreciation Breakfast. We are thankful for the service of our hardworking volunteers, and I look forward to celebrating with you later this week. And just so you know, I'm always astounded by this, but we have over 200 volunteers within the organization that help to put on this program and all of our programming throughout the year. So thank you so much. All of the events and educational offerings at the Exchange are possible by the support of our generous sponsors. Thank you to our diamond sponsor, Prometric. I'm waiting for... We truly appreciate your support. And thank you to our platinum sponsors. So sorry. I'm talking faster than they can move the slides. We have Alpine, Certamide, Criterion, Pearson VUE, PSI Services, and Scantron Assessment Solutions. Having these, yeah. Amazing to have the support. Thank you to our gold sponsor, Heuristic Solutions, and our silver sponsor, Yardstick Assessment Strategies. And finally, yeah, thank you. And finally, I would like to thank our bronze sponsors. We have Ascend Learning, Bench Prep, Cred HQ by Agolutions, Lina, Strauss Assessment Systems, and Test Run. Thank you all again for your support. And just as a reminder, with all of this support from the vendors and from all of you, this wouldn't be possible without our ICE staff, led by our Executive Director, Denise Rosendahl. And now I have the pleasure to turn the stage over to ICE's Executive Director, Denise Rosendahl. Denise, thank you so much. I appreciate you, and I know we all do, for bringing us together.
Thank you, Jonna. And again, welcome to everyone to the ICE Exchange. Before we introduce our keynote speaker, I would like to highlight just a few items. First, with your help, ICE is raising $3,000 for the San Diego chapter of the Young Nonprofit Professionals Network. This is our chance to give back to the city that is hosting us this week. The Young Nonprofit Professionals Network is a volunteer-driven membership organization that connects and develops nonprofit leaders in the area. So please do show your support if you can. I hope you can join us this afternoon for the Research and Development Summit. This session gives you a sneak peek at the research projects that the Research and Development Committee members have been exploring all year. During the session, you will hear an overview of our current projects and have the opportunity to speak with members of the committees in small group discussions. As you know, this is one of the great benefits of ICE membership, the research that we produce each year, and this year we have so much fantastic research coming out. This year we have partnered with BadgeCert to bring you a digital badge for your participation in the 2019 exchange. Sometime after the conference in the next few days, you will receive an email with information about the BadgeCert digital badging platform. You can share your digital badge through Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, as well as your own company website or email. It's a great way to let your colleagues know of your dedication to your own professional development. And for those of you using social media to share your experiences, I've seen some of the selfies going on out there. Please use this hashtag and connect with the ICE social channels. As you heard Jonna mention, we have a record number of attendees in San Diego. This is going to make seating at the awards luncheon tomorrow afternoon a little bit cozy. So we do have an overflow room set up, which will include lunch and audio, as well as the projection of the presentation slides. And because of our room capacity, we do ask that the seating is first come, first serve. But this is a great way to get to know some new folks, and we are going to rely on you to help us identify open seating. So networking is certainly a major goal of the ICE Exchange, so we appreciate your assistance. Finally, the ICE Exchange takes a lot of work and dedication to come together. I would like to specifically thank Avis Ballard for serving as this year's program chair and Sarah Carroll for serving as co-chair. Avis and Sarah worked tirelessly with their dedicated committee members to bring the 2019 conference to life. Please join me in thanking Avis and Sarah for their commitment to this conference. Thank you. Thank you also to the full conference committee for your work throughout the year. If you wouldn't mind, please standing when I call your name, and just stay standing while we recognize everyone. Cynthia Allen, Stephanie Dilley, Danielle Geddes, Morgan Hurt, Jeff Kenny, Amin Issa Jr., Wendy Miller, Ann Minton, Frank Perna, Jared Zern, and Zeno St. Cyr II. Are you here? Thank you. Thank you so much for all your hard work. It really is an incredible conference because of you. I'd like to now thank Scantron Assessment Solutions for sponsoring this year's keynote presenter. Here to introduce our speaker is Dr. Sue Steinkamp, Vice President in Assessment Development and Psychometrics at Scantron. Please join me in thanking Scantron for their generous contribution.
Thank you, Denise. Scantron is a longtime member, supporter, and believer in the importance of ICE. We are proud to once again share with you the keynote presentation. Michelle Kim is a fierce immigrant, queer woman of color and entrepreneur who is challenging the status quo in tech. She is the founder and CEO of Awaken, a leading provider of modern interactive diversity, inclusion, and leadership workshops. Awaken creates compassionate and inspiring learning experiences to empower leaders and teams to lead fearlessly and inclusively in today's dynamic workplace. Michelle has been a lifelong social justice activist and has served in a variety of organizations such as the LGBTQ Speakers Bureau, San Francisco Human Rights Commission's Advisory Committee, and Lyric's nonprofit board of directors. I'm very excited to introduce to you the 2019 keynote speaker, Michelle Kim.
Good morning. Good morning. Hello. It's so great to be here. Thank you so much for allowing me to be here. I'm learning so much about the credentialing industry or the discipline. There's mixed opinions about what to call it, but I'm learning a lot about what you all do. And I was just talking to some of the folks here that, wow, there's a lot of power in this room, right? There's a lot of power that you all have in controlling how people access certain things, certain positions, certain knowledge, certain expertise. So I am so delighted to be here to talk to you about what I know, and I'm also really humbled to be learning so much about what you all do. So thank you for having me. My name is Michelle Kim. I'm the co-founder and CEO of my company, Awaken. I like to call myself the head queen of the company. I think it's a little bit more fun of a title than a CEO. And I use she, her pronouns. And I do this as a practice to normalize not making assumptions about people's gender identities, because you can't really tell how people identify just by looking at them. So I make it a point to always share my pronouns whenever I am on stage. And I have a quote here. Do you have a therapist? This is something that I've been asking everyone that I meet through our workshops and in my personal life, because I feel like we're carrying a lot of stuff with us all the time. And there's been such stigma around talking about the things that we're struggling with. And I have found an amazing therapist, and it's changed my entire life to be able to heal and really talk about things that I've gone through in life. So if you don't have a therapist, I would highly recommend you get one. My background, as Sue mentioned, thank you so much for the intro, is in a lot of different fields. So I come to this work having been an immigrant and having my own personal lived experiences, but also I started my career in management consulting. I was at Deloitte doing human capital and change management work, really seeing how change happens at larger organizations, but through the human lens, right? What does it take for people to adopt new technologies, to adopt new processes, to change the entire company's culture? How do people really adopt change? So that's how I started my career. And with my passion for social justice work, diversity and inclusion work, and my tech background, so I was at multiple different tech startups out in Silicon Valley, and saw that the culture really needed a little bit more empathy, compassion, and understanding. And hence why I decided to start the company, to go a little bit deeper than the surface level conversations that we're used to having around diversity and inclusion. So I am really excited to talk to you about the work that we do just a little bit. The whole mission of the company is to create compassionate space for uncomfortable conversations to develop inclusive leaders and teams. And we were started because of the frustration that so many diversity and inclusion trainings out there felt outdated and surface level. And we weren't really challenging each other to get a little bit uncomfortable so that we can really stretch ourselves and see beyond what we know and what we feel is right in this moment. We've had the privilege of working with a lot of different types of companies, from small stage startups to much larger companies that you probably have known for a long time. And time after time, I realized the need is very similar. No matter where I am, no matter which rooms I'm in, people want space to be seen and to be heard and to connect with each other. So I'm going to be bringing in some of the learnings that we've had over the years that we've existed, and things that I'm picking up as we are observing how our context is shifting in the workplace and outside as well. So a lot has changed since 2016. From the Me Too and Time's Up movement that have taken the Silicon Valley and tech industry as well as the media industry by the storm, to lots of debates and conversations around immigration. We've seen painful footages of family separation at the border. There's still lots of heated conversations happening around this topic, especially in San Diego. Black Lives Matter movement continues to go on. Police brutality and mistreatment of Black communities is still happening in this country. And Starbucks, I don't know if you all remember, they did a company-wide unconscious bias training after an incident that happened in their Philadelphia store location, where 2 Black men who were waiting for their friends were escorted out because they weren't purchasing anything, even though they were sitting there. And then lots of companies and employees inside companies are demanding more of their leaders. So there's been many walkouts in the tech industry where people are mobilizing to demand more from their companies. You know, some of the walkouts have happened because of companies' affiliation with ICE, not this ICE or ICE. So we have to really make sure that we're clarifying what we're talking about here. So all this to say is that our social context is changing. The pressure is being felt both in and outside of the companies, and we are being asked to adapt and to really listen, and we are continuing to fall apart in terms of our understanding of one another. And I am continuing to hear that there is fear on both sides and a polarization of our beliefs. So don't just take my word for that when it comes to polarization. I know we're feeling it, I know we're watching the media, but there's actually data to back this up. So the American Psychological Association has put out a survey that have measured how politics since 2016's presidential election have impacted the workplace culture. They say that 87% of employees are distracted by reading political social media posts during the day. 52% of organizations indicated a greater political volatility in the workplace since the election. And 46% have reported worsening workplace relationships. So what's going on? Why are we so far apart? Well, number one, there's a huge lack of awareness on what is happening and also the historical context that we need to have in order to have better conversations. So the lack of awareness, you know, what to say, what not to say, people not wanting to feel like they need to walk on eggshells, but also people feeling harmed by different things that are being said in the office or outside of their workplace setting. There's fear of being misunderstood on both sides, right? So because we are lacking that awareness and education, people are fearful of saying the wrong thing, and people are afraid of causing harm unintendedly or being called racist, sexist, or whatever names that we are throwing out on the Twitterverse, being called that by saying the wrong thing. There's also lack of accountability when harm occurs. We are often leading with our good intentions, not our impact. When we make mistakes, we're often too quick to justify what we did by saying, well, I didn't mean it that way. And that harm continues to occur without accountability, which is creating a lot of cynicism, doubts, and anger on all spectrum. And there's lack of trust. I think we're really starting to feel that we're not trusting in each other's humanity and giving each other second chances and being able to trust that you're going to be able to hold the feedback that I give without lashing out. So we're all getting more and more scared to be vulnerable. We're all getting scared to really talk about what is deeper in our hearts and our minds, the questions that we have, the challenges that we're having. We're not really being vulnerable with each other. So today I'm going to give you 3 tips that I've learned along the way of having conversations with people on very, very different sides of the political spectrum, as well as different identities in and outside of the workplace. How do we get closer to one another again? How do we have better conversations? How do we really make sure that we are restoring our sense of community and belonging? First tip is to restore humanity. So I know you all are credentialing experts. I don't actually call myself a diversity and inclusion expert because I believe that diversity and inclusion at the end of the day is really about our lived experiences and our humanity. I could be an expert in my own life and my own lived experiences, but I don't know what you went through, right? So I can't ever be an expert in your own life. I know there's lots of diversity and inclusion certifications popping up. I'm not sure what is included in that, but I am a strong believer that everyone can be an expert in their own lived experiences and therefore have language to talk about diversity and inclusion. So really want to focus on the fact that diversity and inclusion isn't about hiring quotas or even processes. These are all important things, but at the end of the day, it's about human beings. It's about people, it's about you and me, it's about people that you work with. So I want you to think about a time when you were going through something. Maybe something happened at work, maybe you're behind a project that's really pressing, maybe you had an argument with your loved one in the morning and you're thinking about that over and over while you're in a meeting. Your mind is not there, even though your body's in the conference room. Excuse me. What do we usually do when we're going through something at work? We say, I'm okay. Somebody asks, hey, how are you? I'm good. I'm a high performer. I could push through this. When we really feel like this. You're not fine. So why do we do this? Scientists call this impression management, that we've learned when we were very young how to get social cues on what is acceptable behavior or not, and in what situation we're going to face negative repercussions for revealing how we really truly feel about ourselves, about our work, about mistakes that we're making. So Google did a 2-year-long research trying to identify what is the most important thing when it comes to developing high-performing teams. Out of 5 key team dynamics that they identified as the most important factors in developing high-performing team, they found there was one thing that every team needs to be successful. Any guesses? Trust. That's close. Anything else? Psychological safety. Psychological safety is a term coined by scientists and a professor at Harvard, Amy Edmondson. She has a fabulous TED Talk. You should all check it out. She talks about this concept of psychological safety. It's the culture of a team in which people are free to take interpersonal risks and be who they are. So you have to be able to take interpersonal risks while not fearing that you're going to face negative repercussions. And part of that is about you being able to be your authentic self, right? Being able to say, hey, I'm not feeling so good today. I'm going through some stuff. I might need a little more space today than usual, right? this is so hard in the modern workplace because we have this notion of work-life balance, right? We've been talking about work-life balance for a long time, as if those two things are separate. We're so used to separating our personal self that is made up of our identities, our life history, our passions, our, what drives us to what have built us, our traumas. That they don't belong in the professional sphere, right? Where we talk about our tasks, our projects, our to-dos, our responsibilities. But the reality is they're blended. We don't ever really check out our identities outside of work before we come into work. We carry our traumas with us. We carry our joyful moments with us. So whether we choose to talk about it or not, it is impacting how we are at work. The way that we perceive one another is impacted by our identities. It's impacted by our previous experiences. But we get to set our own boundaries, right? You'll notice that those two circles are not completely overlapping, and I'm not advocating that we become each other's therapists in the office. So we get to set our boundaries, but we're always taking cues on what is an acceptable amount of vulnerability that we can share before we get in trouble, right? And that line is set largely by the leadership team and the culture that you're surrounded by. We do a lot of exercises in our workshop to help us broaden our scope of concern. So instead of just looking at the tasks that you're tasked to do, can we start looking at each other as full human beings, right? So when we are checking in with one another, instead of going straight to, okay, how are you doing? Great, so the priorities for this week are boom, 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 boom. What if we took a little bit more time to get to know each other on how they are actually doing that day? So we have an exercise that was popularized by Stanford Business School in their most popular class called Interpersonal Dynamics, also called Touchy-Feely. That's one of their class names. I would love it. Where it's a deeper check-in exercise. And it goes something like this. All you have to do is complete the sentence. If you really knew me right now, you would know that, ... That's it. And the other person who is listening to you is supposed to just listen. There's no verbal response requested. It's actually a practice of active listening and being present and holding space for that person. So I'm going to model that for you right now. If you really knew me right now, you would know that I really want to do a good job here. I think all of you hold a lot of power, and I wonder if what I'm saying is connecting. If you really knew me right now, you would also know that I'm thinking a lot about my parents these days. I attended my friend's dad's funeral just last week in LA, and I didn't even know him, and I cried a lot. And just reflecting on how one person's death can impact so many lives got me to think about what's going to happen when my parents are gone. So I've been thinking a lot about that. If you really knew me right now, you would also know that in connection to that, I've been reading a lot about the recent shooting. I don't know if you've been paying attention, but there have been at least 5 shootings in the country in the last week. And 3 of them happened in California. And I think about those lives gone. So my heart is a little bit heavy, but I'm also excited to be here. So if you really knew me right now, you would know that I'm always holding these complexities and trying to grapple with how to find joy in moments of sorrow and grief. And that's how you do it. And it takes a lot of courage to be vulnerable, right? And courage for me isn't just about doing the thing while being afraid. It's doing the thing knowing that you don't know what response you're going to get from the other end. It's doing it anyway because you feel like you can and that you want to, and you are taking chances to connect with the other person. So I'm going to ask you to be a little bit courageous because I just took a lot of risk there. So I'm going to give you 30 seconds per person. I'm going to have you turn around to the person you're sitting with, and I want you to do this. for 30 seconds, and I'll give you a cue when you can switch so that the other person can talk. Again, you just have to talk about what's on your mind right now. If you really knew me right now, you would know that, ... I'm gonna tell you to switch, take turns, and then the other person's gonna go. And if you're sitting with, if you can't find another person, you can do it in triplets, okay? Choose who's gonna go first, and I'll tell you to start when everybody's ready. And I'm watching everyone. All right, sounds like everybody's found their partner. First person, please start. All right, second person, please say thank you to the first person who just went. And second person, please begin. All right, and if there's a third person that needs to go, they can go now. All right. I know there's lots of good conversations happening, but if you can hear me, please clap once. If you can hear me, please clap twice. If you can hear me, please clap 3 times. That one always works like a charm. So, how was that for you? I may have seen some tears. Does anyone want to share? I know you have to speak a little bit louder. I don't think there are mics ready yet, but does anyone want to share how that felt for you? To share and to listen? Yes?
It was great because it's I don't know.
Yeah. Totally. Thank you for sharing. So, to recap, it felt good to be vulnerable, but there was also this sense of safety because you were talking to a stranger. versus if you were in the workplace, you might have a little bit more hesitance and almost mistrust about how that information is going to be used against you. That's a real fear. And isn't that sad that we have to think like that in our own workplace where we spend the vast majority of our time interacting with people that we say we care about, right? That we sometimes fear that we're not completely safe to be who we are. Anyone else? Yes?
I think you feel a sense of connection with the other person because there's a vulnerability that they're exposing that you may have as well.
Yes, thank you. So you feel an increased sense of connection because there's this vulnerability that you're being vulnerable, but you're also witnessing the other person's courage to be vulnerable as well. And vulnerability is actually very contagious. And it can go in either direction, actually. So you could have been paired with somebody who just took the risk and went really deep and shared their, deepest things that they're feeling right now. But you also could have gotten somebody who said, I'm fine, this is kind of weird, it's awkward, I'm excited about the happy hour later, but, yeah, cool. Have you seen the football game? So you could have gotten that. And you know what that does? It sets the bar there. Then you're gonna get other people meeting you right there because you are sending the signal that that is where safety is. Oh, that person doesn't feel safe going there. That I don't feel safe going there. So psychological safety is a really powerful tool, it's a team dynamic, and it takes a long time for us to build that psychological safety in the workplace. It doesn't happen just overnight. It happens time after time, us going through exercises like this, trying it out, and keep putting our faith in our people. But it's really easy to destroy. All it takes is one person scoffing at somebody else's vulnerability, and the trust is lost. So in that sense, you all actually have the power to control whether or not your team has a sense of psychological safety. Because the moment somebody behaves in such a way that breaks the entire team's trust and psychological safety, guess what restores it? That person being put in their place. That, hey, we don't do that here, right? So we all have the responsibility and accountability and the power to be able to make that difference inside our workplaces and even at a conference like this. One more comment and then we're gonna move on. Ava said it was liberating that you're able to share something on your test. So sometimes I get asked the question, like, what's the point of me sharing this information, right? Or what's the point of me listening to this information that somebody has to say when I can't do anything about it, right? This person's going through a tough divorce. I can't do anything about that. We're here to do work. What's the point? Well, sometimes all we need to do is hold space. Let's just name that thing that's on our mind so then we can focus on our work, right? So we're actually creating that space for people to be able to park that thing that they're thinking about and for us to feel that sense of connection so we can do our work even better. Thank you for sharing, everybody who's so brave to share in front of a big crowd. Thank you. All right, and I share this because the foundation of doing diversity and inclusion work is to start seeing the people. What are they going through? What is this human being who is working next to me? Or what is the person who is not yet here requiring to feel safe in this space? And what we're really, really bad at is teasing out the humanity, teasing out the personal in the political discourse. What I mean by that is when these shootings happen, before we get to the gun control laws, we can still go back to the humanity of feeling the pain of people losing their loved ones. The panic and terror that we feel that our children are in schools going through drills week after week. That gut feeling of connecting to our humanity is what we need to restore in this conversation, no matter which side of the political spectrum we're on. So that's your tip number one, make things personal. Tip number two is to understand the foundation of identities. Why are we talking about identities? Why does this matter? What does this matter in the workplace or elsewhere? Why are we so focused on who we are and what people look like? Isn't that counter to what we're trying to achieve? We really need to understand why identities matter, what identities we're talking about, and how all of these issues link to our lived experiences. So I'm going to use myself as an example. This is where you go, "Aww." I was a feisty child. So every person has our personal identities. This is how we identify, how we see ourselves internally. So for me, I'm actually quite introverted nowadays. I recover by being alone. So after this, I might just run up to the hotel room and be in the bedroom by myself. I am passionate. I really care about stuff that I do and I talk about. My partner tells me I'm very critical, and my team also. I am very critical about things that I do, the quality that we produce, the work that we do. I'm a Virgo too, so I'm hypercritical and I'm a perfectionist tendencies. Yeah, I see some Virgos out there giggling. And I think I'm pretty funny. So these are my personal identities. On the other side, I also have my social identities. These are identities that are defined by the sense of belonging or belonging to a social group, right? So this is about the collective, and this is how often society sees me. And it is things like the fact that I'm Asian, surprise, I'm Asian, I'm a woman, I identify as queer, and I'm college educated, right? So because I have these social identities, I belong to a certain social group. And social identities are really important for us to talk about because these are oftentimes how our systems and processes and policies are structured around, right? So you don't go to the bathroom based on your introvertedness or extrovertedness, right? So our systems and institutions are organized by some of these social identities. So when we look at benefits or protections or laws, and historical sort of context around how legal systems and policies have been structured, we're really paying attention to the social identities. So we can't confuse personal identities from social identities. Clear? Great. And it's really important for us to note that our identities are very complex and multidimensional. So when we talk about diversity and inclusion, oftentimes we're forgetting to encompass all slew of different identities that we can be talking about. Oftentimes we're talking about gender, maybe race, but we forget to talk about all these other things that make up who we are. Parenthood status, our citizenship status, our religion, our disability, our abilities, our mental health, our education, our socioeconomic background. There's whole different things that make up who we are. And it's really important for us to hold all of those things at the same time, that we are multidimensional, complex human beings. And the word that always gets us into trouble, privilege. This is so important for us to unpack as we talk about identities. So what is privilege? I'm going to unpack this for you all because I think there's a lot of misconceptions about what privilege means. And when we think about privilege, we have an image that goes up into our head, which we'll talk about. Privilege means unearned benefits granted or available only to a particular social identity group. Now, I don't want you to think that privilege only happens to tall white men, because we all actually have different types of privileges. So let's unpack that. It's really, really difficult for us to talk about this idea of privilege, oftentimes because it's something that we don't really think about or we feel. So when you are talking about things that you've been through in your life. So for example, for me, again, So this is a picture of me when I was little. I pulled a muscle in my elbow or something because my mom and dad were doing the swing thing and it hurt me. So they took me to the hospital and I was feeling pain. I felt pain, and in that moment what I was feeling is what? My arm is hurting and I deserve this popsicle thing, right? But what I don't think about in that moment is this. Someone took me to the doctor. That's a privilege. Someone took care of me. Someone paid for the bill, right? These are all the things that I'm not focused on because I know my pain is first and foremost what I'm feeling right now. Similarly, I remember very vividly growing up in a divorced household. I remember feeling ashamed when it was bring your dad to school day and my dad wasn't there because he was living in a different country. So I remember growing up in a divorced household very vividly because there was a lot of pain and shame and confusion around why that was. You know, I used to say that I'm going to buy a big house and that's my dream because I thought that our house wasn't big enough to house both my mom and dad, and that's why that they were divorced. But you know what I don't remember thinking about is ever questioning whether my parents were gay. I never had to think about the complexities of living with non-heterosexual parents. I never had to think about that. I grew up low income. When I moved to the States when I was 13 from South Korea, I started working when I was 14. My first job was at Cold Stone Creamery. Yay, Cold Stone! I gained a lot of weight. And I spent my entire high school career without health insurance. So I remember very vividly going to this very shady looking clinic by the border and being there at 5 a.m., waiting in line to be seen. All you had to do there was pay $20, no questions asked, you get to see a doctor, and sometimes he'll even give you a shot. So I remember growing up low income, right? I remember working my butt off to pay for college. I remember being ashamed to go out to dinner with friends and not being able to pay the bill that everybody split. I didn't order that drink, why are we splitting evenly? But what I don't remember or what I don't think about often is the fact that I was able to get jobs. I never had to worry about not being able to get a job. I was always able to get a job because of my status, because of my ability to interview in certain ways, ability to, show up in a certain way, and I never had to worry about that. I grew up immigrant, so I moved here from South Korea when I was 13, so things that I remember, again, are the pain points, right? I remember always being so afraid to be called on popcorn style in the classroom because I didn't want to read a passage out loud, because I didn't want people to know that I didn't know how to pronounce certain words on the textbook. And I remember being made fun of and being bullied for not speaking English perfectly, but I don't remember me struggling with being documented, right? I don't remember me having to worry about being, without documents when I'm stopped. And again, I remember being queer. I remember coming out. I remember falling in love with a woman for the first time and being really confused about that because I also really liked boys. So I remember being confused. I remember how nervous I was to hold a girl's hand in public. I remember the stares that I would get. I remember all these feelings of not being normal growing up. But you know what I don't remember? Is on my way to the date, worrying about whether I was going to get pulled over by a police officer and whether that was going to threaten my life. I never have to worry about that. So the point here is, even though we all have our painful stories and marginalizations, we also have things that we may not be thinking about that give us tremendous amount of privilege. And having these experiences actually is completely out of our control. That's where the unearned part comes from. I didn't ask for any of this. I didn't ask to be born into a household that was going to be experiencing a divorce. I didn't ask to be born queer, believe it or not. I didn't ask for it. I didn't ask to be not facing police brutality, right? These are all things that were just given to me based on my social identities and how our society functions today. And it's really important to note that these things don't cancel each other out. Just because I have heterosexual parents, that doesn't diminish my experience growing up in a divorced household, right? And we're really, as human beings, we're really bad at holding these complexities at the same time. We want to make people feel like they're one-dimensional, but we're not. So don't do that to yourself by diminishing some of your experiences with one or the other. And the last thing about privilege that is really important to wrap our head around is that these things, where do they come from? Why do we have certain privileges and some don't? The fact that it actually comes from systemic power. Because it's not in our control, it's largely because of our society, how it's been developed, how historically we've experienced things, and how laws and our society have been structured. So this is a really important piece. So systemic power, it's a term that gets thrown around, so I'm going to unpack it really quickly. Systemic power is legitimate legal access and ability to control others' access to institutions, resources, and decisions impacting their lives. These things include our banking systems, to the jobs, who's at the top of the hierarchy at our companies, who is in our policing systems, who is in our judicial system, who is in our executive branch, who is in our, all the things that control how we do things, right? Who makes the rules? That is what we mean by systemic power. And why we are talking so much about diversity, because people who are in the seats that control this power and access to things, who are shaping the laws and the processes and policies, and even people that do your job, predominantly people who hold the most power at these institutions have been white men. And this is not to vilify white men, but it's to show that this is why the conversation's happening, right? This is where we are pushing the boundaries to really ensure that we're including perspectives that serve the vast majority of our society. And so when we talk about these isms, right, the white supremacy, patriarchy, ableism, heterosexism, we have to actually put emotions aside and think about this as the terms that show who is in power, right? So this is all about power. This is all about how decisions get made. So that's what we mean by systemic power and how that gives birth to different types of privileges. Because without even thinking about how we are designing things, because we don't have the right perspectives in the room, we're designing things as if we all experience the same things, right? So I cover some key things that we need to remember about privilege. So what can we do about these, right? Our privileges are often unfelt to us. Well, one way that we can start really discovering them is being reflective about what privileges we do have, right? How can we really be in touch with some of the privileges that we all hold, not just white men, but all of us? How can we be more in tune with them? And how can we be more responsible about that? So we didn't ask for them, but what we get to do with, we are in control. So what I do with the privileges that I have control over. And while we hold both that we have marginalized experiences as well as privileged experiences, we also need to acknowledge that we didn't face certain type of struggles. And those are the opportunities where we can really make a difference. And that privilege comes from systemic power, and that we all actually have the privilege to disrupt the power imbalance by doing our part. So the last tip is how we use our privilege to make an impact. So all of us can start to map out our privileges. So I've mapped out a few of my privileges based on all these different identities that I hold. So first step is to understand what privileges you have. For me, as a non-disabled person, I could show up and be supportive of people with disabilities. What does that look like? I can advocate for accessible events. I can advocate for always including alternative text to image files that we present on our social media. I could advocate to use colors that are friendly for colorblind folks. I can advocate for a lot of different things because I'm more likely than not to be in those rooms when those decisions happen. As a cisgender person, that means I was assigned female at birth, and I still identify as a woman, so opposite of a transgender. So as a cisgender person, I can support the trans community. How do I do that? Well, I was just introducing myself with pronouns, right? That's a way of normalizing the behavior of not making assumptions about other people and not just putting that burden on the trans community to do that, right? So we can all share the burden of being able to make differences wherever we go, because we hold these privileges. And we also, back to the original psychological safety, we have a greater chance of not facing negative repercussions when we do these things, as opposed to people who are actually identifying with these communities. And as a documented person, I can support people who are undocumented. This means that whenever I go to parades or things like Pride or protests, big events and gatherings where lots of security guards and lots of police officers are there, I get to walk closer to the edge, near the security, near the police officers, because I'm not as threatened by having them around me as the undocumented people do or black or brown people do, right? And there's a lot of different opportunities that you have in your hands to be able to do this work too. One is to educate yourself. One really quick trick is to map out who is in your social media. Who do you follow? Where do you get your news sources from? Diversify that. Commit to enlarging your pool of different voices by following at least 20 different people and see what happens. See what kind of information you get, see what kind of things that you learn from just exposing yourself to different stories. The second is the IAT. I'm sure some of you are familiar with this. Is implicit association test that was developed by MIT and I believe Stanford professors, Harvard and MIT professors that developed the implicit association test, a free test you can go online and you can take these tests that tell you what kind of biases you have. So are you more biased towards or against darker skinned people or people who are younger or older? So it's a free test that anyone can take in and you can start to map out what kind of biases you might hold and how that may impact the decisions that you make. Second, don't make assumptions about people, right? No one wants to be assumed of anything. No one wants to be misunderstood. A really simple way for us to do that is ask people what pronouns they use before you start addressing them as he, she, or they, or start using the they singular pronouns so that you are making any assumptions about people's gender identities. When designing a new process, really think about who you're designing it for, right? And if you don't have the perspectives of people you want to also incorporate, make sure you're seeking them out. How do you make the process as accessible and inclusive as possible? And ask what support looks like. So don't just assume, oh, this is what people with disabilities would want. We always want to engage the people we seek to support in the decision-making process. The third is to advocate. You can challenge biased decision-making. I don't know how many of you are in hiring managing positions, but oftentimes we hear things like, oh, that person was good, but just doesn't seem like a good culture fit. What does that mean? What do you mean by that? That's a very catch-all phrase that we use to hire people who are like us, right? So challenge those types of thinkings that come up when you're making decisions. When we do certain things because we've always done this way, that's a really good cue for you to start thinking about, is that really the right way for us to do this? Is this really the most inclusive way that we could be designing our processes and our tests and our exams and the way that people go through our experience? You hold a lot of knowledge and expertise. So how about sharing that? You know, I remember when I was getting ready to take my SAT exam, I didn't have a lot of access to the courses that other folks were taking or private tutors and the centers that folks were going to really understand how to ace the exam. And I think there's a lot of conversations about whether or not those types of standardized tests actually measure people's intelligence and also potential to be able to succeed and thrive in the higher education setting. So really think about what are some ways that you can increase access so you can set everybody up for success. Who may not have more access to the resources that maybe others may have? And how can we really make a fair process designed for everyone? On any form fields, there are simple things that you can do to include multiple gender identity options. So most common things that I see is you identify as a woman or man or female male. That really excludes a whole bunch of people who may identify as neither. And non-binary folks, they're starting to get more and more legal recognition on their, state IDs and things like that. In California, if you're non-binary, you actually get the alphabet X on your license. I don't know if y'all know that, but it's a new thing that started and is starting to happen a lot more across the country. And lastly, pass the mic. If you've been in positions where you're designing processes, maybe offer somebody else who's more junior, maybe somebody who's newer, who has fresh perspectives, and who has different perspectives than yours. Also invite them to the table so that they can get their voices heard. All right, so before we wrap up, I have a few more things that I'm going to give you as important tips. I want you to turn to your neighbor one more time, and I want you to think about all the things that you just heard and commit to just doing one thing. What is one thing that you're going to do to make a positive difference based on what you heard today? And if that's one thing is, I really didn't get this whole talk, and I'm gonna think about it, or I'm gonna talk to somebody about it, that's one action too, and that's okay. So I'm gonna give you 30 seconds to share with one another what is one thing that you can commit to doing in the next 30 days to create a positive impact in your sphere of influence. Ready, set, go. All right. If you can hear me, clap once. If you can hear me, clap twice. All right, all good. Does anyone want to volunteer their commitments? Studies have shown that if you say your commitment out loud and put it out into the universe, you're more likely to achieve it. So who would like to share their commitment? Do I see one? Yes, in the back. Thank you. So the person said, I want to be less transactional with my colleagues and be able to go a little bit deeper in our check-ins beyond just how are you. Anyone else? I just saw hands over here. Yes? I want to learn how to use graphic design and diversity to incorporate the two. Yeah, understand how D&I is incorporated into design. Amazing. Thank you. Anyone else? Okay. Thank you for making those commitments. Make sure you're holding each other accountable too. This is a good time for you to exchange your Instagram handles, to follow up with each other. So I have one bonus strategy before we end this conversation, is to practice courage. None of this is easy because we can make mistakes. There's a lot of fears and uncertainties and doubts that we go through. Fears, uncertainties, and doubts, FUDs. That's what we talk about. Is this really my place to be doing this, talking about this? If somebody says something in a meeting, should I really jump in here? Because I don't know if I have the right words to describe what I just felt. I don't know the right way to be supportive. I don't want to inadvertently cause more harm than good. I might offend them. I don't want to be offensive. I don't want to make mistakes. Well, part of this journey is owning that you're going to make mistakes. I make mistakes all the time. And I have a great team of people who feel psychologically safe enough to be able to challenge me when I do so. And the grace in taking accountability for your mistakes is part of this work. So courage is really important for us to create this change. So these are the 3 tips that I have for you in practicing courage. 1, practicing vulnerability. That takes courage, and it's also a muscle that you build over time. It doesn't just happen once. And when you do this, you might also feel what, there's a name for this, I don't love the name, it's called vulnerability hangover. It's a thing that you feel after you've shared something really deep, that you feel ashamed. that, oh, I think I just shared too much. So if any of you is feeling like that right now, it's part of the practice. Challenging the status quo, that takes courage for us to say, you know, I know this is how we've been doing things all these years, but let's switch it up. If somebody didn't say that, if somebody didn't want me to be on this stage, I wouldn't be here, right? So somebody had to advocate for me to be on this stage today. And when mistakes occur, because undoubtedly it will, you will make mistakes, apologize and own it. You know, don't do the non-apology apology of, you know, I'm sorry if that's how you felt, or I'm sorry if, you know, there's lots of corporate apologies on Twitter that's getting dragged around. You know, I'm sorry if anyone was offended by what we did. That's not what we meant. That is not an apology. An apology is, I am so sorry. I really messed that up. I'm going to do better. That's it. Brené Brown said, you can choose courage or you can choose comfort. You cannot have both. And I say that having that choice to stay comfortable is perhaps the greatest privilege that we all enjoy. If we can disengage from an issue that we call political, that are impacting people's personal lives, that is truly the luxury that many people don't get to enjoy. When I get fearful, because I do too, I always have to remember my why. Do you recognize these faces? These are student activists that have gathered after the Parkland shooting. You know, just within short days, matter of days, they gather to advocate for their safety and their lives. So when I get discouraged about the work that I do, when I get fearful about the pushback that I'm gonna get, I think about the courage displayed by our young people. And I think about how our workplaces right now aren't ready. I don't think they're ready to be welcome and to feel psychological safety in the workplaces that we currently have designed. So I want you to think about, what's your why? Why is this important to you? Because this may not impact your life on a day-to-day basis. So why should you care? I really want you to think about that. Because without that, it's really hard to stay courageous. It's really hard to keep going in this battle for equity, inclusion, fairness, and diversity. So think about your why. And with that, I'm going to open up to Q&A. Thank you very much. And you can follow me on all the things, all the social media. Please feel free to email me if you have any feedback or questions or things that you want to flesh out. I am on all the social medias. You can follow me on LinkedIn. But for now, I want to take a few questions before we have to end to the next session. And take pictures and send it to me so I can show it to my mom. Because it's not being recorded, so you can send me the picture, make my mom and dad proud. I know there are microphones going around. Okay, there's a question in the back.
Hi, great presentation, by the way.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. One thing that I struggle with is with my staff, creating a safe space. We're talking, and even though I might be holding space, I feel like they are wanting counseling or something from me. And it's very hard to just say, okay, I hear you, I'm here for you. What now?
Yeah.
And so even if I'm open to having the conversation, it's a little hard to stop and know what's a good bookend so that we can continue and they don't feel like, oh, I was just talking to Hillary, she doesn't care, she just kind of dismissed me.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing that. What's your name?
Hillary?
Hillary. Thank you, Hillary, for sharing that. I think that's a very common question that we get when it comes to creating psychological safety and opening up this, channel for people to share what is on their mind. I think it's really important if you are people managers to always come back to your role, right? Your job as a manager is to set up your team for success. So I always bookend the conversation around, hey, how are you doing? Let's do a check-in. How are you really doing? What can I do to support you? Is ending with, what do you need to be able to do your best work this week? Do you need more time remote working? Or do we need to shift your priorities for this week so you can focus on other things? Or did you just want to vent? And is this enough for you? So it's just checking in with them and what is it that you need? What can I do for you? What can I do to support you in this moment? So I think that is a really key question for us to be able to follow up that sharing with, great, what do you need from us? What can I do to support you? And they may not always have the answers, and that's okay. And if there's no answer, then I appreciate you sharing, and I'm gonna hold that. And thank you for letting me know where you are at. Other questions? I see a hand back there. Don't be shy. Yes.
This is perfect. Okay, all right. Yeah, I lose at the game of silent chicken all the time, so I'll ask the question. So a lot of these conversations about inclusion are happening, and more so than I've ever seen before, not surprisingly.
Yep.
So to pose the challenging question to you is, how much of these conversations are a sort of check the box activity versus people who are truly embracing them, and just how have you seen that progressing? And by the way, I'm not a check the box person.
Thank you. What's your name?
Rob.
Rob. That's a really important thing because I think since the election and the Me Too movement, there's a lot of companies just trying to check boxes. So we get calls all the time, hey, can you come for like an hour-long lunch and learn so we can just check the box? They don't say the last part, but I know that's what they mean. There's a lot of that I see still. I see some companies, I think, and some leaders starting to feel the real pressure from their people and folks being able to really see through the false promises. And I think the challenge also is there's a lot of companies out there. I don't know if you go to your website, if you have a careers page or culture page that talks about how you're committed, your company is committed to diversity and inclusion. And diversity and inclusion has become this marketing slogan that a lot of companies are preaching out there. But when we peel back the layers, none of their leaders have gone through the journey themselves. So what we see is us regurgitating the business case for diversity statement that we've been using for the last 25, 30 years around how diversity gets us innovation, diversity gets us more profitability, but it's not really connecting to the human aspect of this, right? So I do a lot of work with executives on, can you actually redevelop your story, your narrative around why you care about this subject beyond just innovation? Because to get to that point, we have a long way to go, right? So I do see some changes, and the changes come based on the social pressure that companies feel, or after lawsuits, people feeling like, okay, we really need to do something, or from grassroots internal pressure of employees demanding more, and also our future workforce, right? Millennials and Gen Z and the younger people are starting to ask more pointed questions about company culture and what we're doing about inclusion and equity and diversity. And we're also seeing a huge retention issue. We spend a lot of time trying to recruit people who are coming from diverse backgrounds, and when they get there, the systems and the cultures are not set up for success, and all we're doing is checking boxes, that folks are leaving. So I do a lot of work in tech, and there was a study around why women and people of color are leaving the tech jobs at a really, really fast, scary rate. Why are they leaving the tech industry? There was a study done by the Kapor Center out in Oakland. What they found is that the number one reason why women and people of color leave tech is because of their sense of unfairness. And there's this striking statistic that said almost 50% of Black women and Latinas have experienced being mistaken as a janitor or an administrative staff in their own workplace. Now, there's nothing wrong with being a janitor, but if that is the trope that you're consistently met with and that is a stereotype you experience, you start to question your sense of belonging at a place. So to your point, I think there is a lot more work that we need to be doing beyond just checking boxes and having conversations at the very surface level. Because diversity and inclusion is not all happy and innovation oriented, right? We actually have to really solve the root causes of where the pain points are. So I wish that more leaders would take on that approach of going deeper and being personally committed to the mission rather than just saying the marketing slogans. Thank you for that question. Yes?
I might be able to just talk.
Oh, yeah.
What's your experience in probing intention? And what I mean by that, what I mean by that is when someone says something inappropriate, or your example was that we don't do that here, or we don't say that here. Oftentimes, I think it's helpful to say, why did you say that? What was your intention? What were you trying to accomplish with that comment?
I think that's a really good tactic. Sorry, what's your name?
Mark.
Mark says something that's really important because I think intention is not useless. I think it's actually really good, a good intervention tactic for us to actually ask where they're coming from. So when somebody says, oh, this person just doesn't have enough leadership potential when somebody's up for promotion, one thing that you can say is, what do you mean by that? What made you say that? So I do think that it's a really helpful tactic, so I don't want to miss that. I think what I'm trying to say is, oftentimes we focus too much on the intention and give too much grace to the intention piece that we forget about the accountability of the impact, that I think we need to hold them both, right? One useful phrase I'm gonna leave you with is, if you hear something or if you want to challenge a narrative, there's this phrase that you can use where, I used to think blank, then I learned blank, and now I think blank. So for example, when next week's Thanksgiving, so I'm gonna be with my dad's side of the family, and it's gonna be important for people surrounding the dinner table to understand that Thanksgiving is not just about gratitude. There's a lot of historical complexity that we need to acknowledge with the native folks and the indigenous communities that were displaced. So I use that phrase. I used to think that Thanksgiving is all about gratitude, about giving thanks and being grateful for what we have. Then I learned that the history around Thanksgiving is not very pretty. There was a genocide and there's all these things that I didn't know about, so I learned that. So now I think that Thanksgiving is actually a little bit more complicated than I used to think. That's a really helpful framing for us to not shame and blame people for not knowing certain things, but to model vulnerability and humility in the fact that, hey, I didn't know all these things either. And I know where you're coming from, and here's the impact, let's focus on that. All right? Thank you, I think that is the last question that we could take. Thank you so much for your time and for staying engaged. I really appreciate it. I'll stay here to answer any more questions if you need, but thank you for having me, I'm really humbled.
Thank you, Michelle Kim. Coffee is now available in the Innovation Hall in Sapphire Ballroom BC.